So welcome everyone. I'm Alex Papanikolaou. I'm from the Hawkesbury Institute for the Environment of Western Sydney. And with me today is V from the Research Continuity Student Council of the HDR cohort, James Arvanitakis, the PVC for Engagement of Western Sydney, and Tayo O'Donnell from Future Earth, from the Australian Academy of Sciences. So I want to welcome everyone. And V is going to be our chairperson today. So please, V, take over.
So hello, everyone. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity, James, Alexei. Secondly, this is my first time doing this, so please guide me because I have no idea. So today our topic is, I wrote it down, let's see, looking for the next step, and which I think is a really relevant topic, especially under our current circumstances. And so let's begin.
Perhaps we can ask James to kick us off.
Yeah, hey everyone. Thanks for this, and I want to say a couple of things. First of all, to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands in which we meet. We're all over the country, which is always really exciting. And Tana, I know that a lot of the Future Earth perspectives, especially, we've touched base on this before about acknowledging the long history of Aboriginal knowledge on this land. The second thing I want to say is to welcome Tayana to this. She's completed a PhD with the Institute for Culture and Society, and so I'm sure she'll get a chance. And I think it's, if you find out about her research, it truly is amazing. And so I'm really kind of, really always enjoy reading your work, and so I'm really excited to be on a panel with you. So it's such an interesting topic to think about what's next, because I do have 7 tips which I'll share in a moment, but just to contextualize it, the first thing to say is the concept of what next assumes that we finish something, and in a way we never finish it. And I will give you the advice of a PhD that finish is better than perfect. And so to sort of have that sense of what's next is almost like, well, even when you're submitting your PhD, there's lots of unfinished business, I suppose. There's there's probably interviews that you've done that you haven't taken advantage of that you can turn into articles, or there's sections that you've researched which haven't quite made the final cut of your PhD. And so I suppose the thing is to acknowledge that it's never quite finished, even if you have no intention into entering academia. There's still lots of things to do. So it's never quite, I suppose it's never quite finished. So there's lots of things to do next. If I can share my screen, hopefully. I put together this short presentation because this is the way I like to, hang on, where is it? This is the way I like to think is with presentations. So if you can just bear with me, I will put that up on screen, yeah. So seven tips, I suppose, that I will share with you. The first one is to take a break and think deeply. And I mean, it's interesting. I think the most people, once you submit, or once you finish any large project, you always sort of become a little bit, you're a bit exhausted. And I think because the nature of academia is often where we tend to like push really hard to do the next big thing. We often forget to take care of ourselves, and we often will try and jump straight into something thinking that we haven't got time. But there's a real risk of burnout. There's a risk of not doing your best. So it's important to do take a break, and that could be a holiday, time with family, a combination of both. But it's really, really important that we do that. And all the way through your PhD journey, it doesn't matter if you're thinking about finishing your confirmation of candidature, your early candidature plan, or your ethics. You should continuously give yourself planned breaks. And even when you submit your PhD, you should be having a planned break. And then to think deeply about what you've enjoyed and what you want to do next. On that front, what you want to do next, I think, is most important, is to be flexible in what you want to do. A lot of you will have people that finish a PhD think that, oh, this is the only pathway for me. Sometimes you think, oh, I just want to get into academia. or I don't want to get into academia, my advice is don't write anything off. There are so many amazing pathways, and none of those pathways are mutually exclusive. And I think that increasingly, you know, for those, you know, well, when I started my PhD about 15 years ago was when I first started my PhD. When I first started, the idea was that if you didn't get into academia, you failed. But now that's no longer the case. Increasingly, there's flexibility in the pathway between academia and a sort of non-academic career. But also, I think, as you'll hear from Tayana, there's so many amazing opportunities in there, also. And those things aren't mutually exclusive, but be flexible in your pathways. You know, speaking to Alexi about his time as CSIRO, you know, like all these things, you should hear the different pathways that people take, which I think are really important. And again, one doesn't exclude the others. Third is to not lose connection with your sort of intellectual community. I say he start a blog. Doesn't have to be a formal, a really hardcore blog, but anything to sort of keep connected. It could be something that you work, say, through something like, you know, I know, for example, TASA, the Australian Sociological Association, they sort of advertise people's blogs, but there's other people that invite you to do guest blogs and things like that. And that's just so you can stay connected with the community. So we're your research community and your research partners. And so that's something that I've always done. And it's always worked for me to connect with other researchers who tend to find my work, even in areas that aren't my main research focus, even things like reflecting on, you know, life as an academic and things like that. The fourth thing to say is to take advantage of your networks. There are lots of different networks that you would have made along the way. Reach out to them and tell them what you're up to and what you're doing and what you're interested in. You know, a lot of people respond saying, oh, you know, there's nothing at the moment happening directly that is relevant to you or to this network, but it's important that people know what you're up to. And I think often you can never underestimate word of mouth. People will say, oh, you know, there's a job going here, or hey, someone's looking for some assistance there, or there's a research position here. So just don't be scared to sort of reach out to people and send them a note of what you're up to and what you're planning to do. It often leads to word of mouth opportunities that you may not have found. The fifth thing to say is to learn to explain your different skill set in different ways. And what I mean here is Inga Mewburn, Dr. Inga Mewburn, who many of you will know as the thesis whisperer, she did this analysis of job applications or job advertisements. And what she found was that the vast majority of positions that ask for high-end research skills don't actually mention the words PhD or the letters PhD. They don't mention doctorate at all. What they say is they're looking for deep analytical, you know, thinkers or deep analytical skills in everything from communications to marketing to mathematics to a whole bunch of things. So you need to be able to analyze those kinds of position descriptions, and you need to be able to respond to the kinds of things that people are looking for without just saying, I got a PhD, and thinking that explains all your skill set. In fact, sometimes, you know, you need to be careful not just to rely on the assumptions that people know what a PhD is. You need to be very clear about the fact that you know, this is a skill set I have, and explain what it means. You know, this morning I interviewed someone who is a specialist in quantum information theory, and he explained to me quantum information theory in a way that made it sound like I was doing in the most simplest methods. Like I walked away from like a 15-minute conversation with him and thought, oh my God, I know more about quantum information theory than I thought was was ever possible for a sociologist. But he was able to explain it. He was able to explain how he could apply those skills into different situations, and that is a really, really that was a really, really powerful thing to see, to sort of be able to do that, and really see how thinking about how you can apply your skill set. So if you're talking to someone about a job, don't just say, I can do this. Be prepared to say something like, this is the skill set I have, and this is how it's applied to the area that we're talking about. So 6 is prepare materials, and what I mean here is some of the things I said earlier about, you know, articles that are unpublished, articles that are, you know, you've started, or sections of your thesis that didn't quite make the final cut. A lot of people want to publish their thesis, especially in the humanities and social sciences, but they just assume that they can just pick up a thesis and send it to a publisher and they'll publish it as it is. Very, very few publishers are interested in publishing a thesis like that. Be prepared to change the materials, prepare materials, think about how you're going to be, you know, showing what you know and what your skill set is to different audiences. And the final thing to say is to reflect. Reflect on your journey, reflect what you learned, reflect what you enjoyed, and also, most importantly, reflect on what you hated. What I really hated about my PhD was the fact that that it felt so isolating and challenging, and that I kept on feeling that I was put in situations where you know, I wasn't included because I was, you know, quite only a PhD student, and for me that became a really important marker. So I wouldn't, you know, made sure that if I did enter academia, and something I've reflected on a lot is to try and be as inclusive as I can in my practices. And one of the reasons why we established this, because I didn't want people to feel alone and isolated. Yeah, so they're my 7 tips. I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass back to you, V, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, James. Tanea, would you like to add on to that?
Sure, thank you. I love the idea of 7 tips or 7 principles. They mirror mine, but I only have 3, and I'll talk to them briefly and hopefully add a few different layers to some of that thinking. So by way of very brief background, as James mentioned, I did my doctorate at the Institute of Culture and Society. I started it in 2010 and I was conferred in 2018. I think I finished somewhere at the end of 2016 or 2017. It's all a bit of a blur now. And when I started it back in 2010, I was really adamant that I wanted to do an interdisciplinary PhD, and I wanted the PhD to be what was then called very applied, so very focused on impact with the communities that I was talking to and engaging with throughout the research process. The dissertation itself was about coastal climate change adaptation, and I looked at that through a legal geography lens and incorporated into that legal, social and cultural perspectives, and political perspectives too, because everything's political on one view. And so it was a long journey for me, and it really informed the pathways that I've taken since finishing the dissertation, because my driving force, or what really motivated me to get out of bed every morning and do this kind of work, was to make a difference in the world. And I know that sounds really trite and idealistic, and you know, we all probably get out of bed and want to make a difference in the world in whatever we're doing, and that's good, and we should do that. But it really framed for me where I've ended up post-PhD and what I think about in terms of these 3 take-home messages or key points for you all at the stages you are at in your journey, in your career journey. So for me, I've got the 3 broad points. One is that you are valuable and your skills are valuable, and those 2 things are different. They might be related or interconnected, but they are different, and you should think about them differently. The second one is about your networks, and I remember being an ECR in academia, and almost every seminar I went to of this nature was like, you just need to have some networks, and if you go out there and network, you'll be fine, you'll get a job. And everyone would sort of leave going, that sounds great, but where do you start, and what does it mean to build a network and have a network, and where do you take it? So I have some thoughts about that. And then my third point, particularly given that we're in 2020, is that future jobs aren't really known, I don't think. I think we had a sense even 6 months ago what the future jobs might be over the next 5 years, even 10 years, but I think that's changed very, very rapidly. And so I have a few thoughts about that. The main one is that you should be hopeful and positive and optimistic, and you should not see that as a burden or as something that's challenging or weighing you down, because I think there are opportunities. So coming back to the first point, you and your skills. So I think you can think about this in two ways. One is, what is your value system? Where do your morals and your integrity lie? And how does that drive your decision making? Would you be happy working for private sector who may make decisions such as blowing up an Indigenous site? You may well be, and that's fine. You may not be, and that will dictate where you will apply your energies in terms of thinking about next steps after your PhD or your master's. Who you are and where you've come from is a really important part of your life. And having done all of my degrees at Western Sydney University, I really admire and am proud of the diversity of the university. And that's something that we should champion and something that you should take with you. So sometimes when you're networking and doing things, you might come across people who'll say, where did you do your doctorate or your degree? And you'll say Western Sydney University, and they may look at you with a particular look or say a particular thing, and you will know from that they've made a decision about you based on where you completed your training. And I would encourage you to be really explicit in pushing back on that and being really proud of the fact that Western Sydney University has given you something that the other sandstone universities don't give you. For me, that was immense opportunities, significant support, both pastoral and intellectual, and an opportunity to learn from people who have grown up in all different circumstances. And that's a good thing, and I carry that with me, and I'm very proud of it. So that's some things that you can think about with respect to you and who you are as a person and how you navigate life, both in your doctorate and beyond. And then your skills. It's really, really critical, and James touched on this, that you think about yourself not as your discipline, but as what you can do and what you can bring and how you can apply yourself to something. So this is me being a little bit more pragmatic now, when you're writing a cover letter or responding to a selection criteria or working through your CV, you should be thinking about transferable skills, things like project management. If you've completed a PhD, then you know how to project manage. You can organise stakeholders, you can manage your budget, you can work to deadlines, things like that. You will have hard and soft skills. You'll have the technical skills that your disciplines training has taught you. You will have technical scientific skills that your methodologies and the way you've approached your methods have taught you. And you will have soft skills because you might have been in that room networking with someone from a university who said, Western Sydney University? And instead of maybe swearing at them, you responded in an appropriate way. That means you have soft skills. You can read a room, you can talk to different people and different audiences. You've had supervisors who you've worked with, your school or your faculty or institute, and indeed the broader community if you've gone out and done field work and things like that. So you should emphasise that because they're important skills. Things like working in a team environment are really critical too for a range of jobs, private sector, industry, government, the not-for-profit sector, which is where I am now. You have to be able to work with a team. You have to be able to demonstrate that you can make decisions quickly and back them up. You have to be able to demonstrate that you can adjust to competing priorities if the strategic direction of your team changes for some reason. Those are all things that are really specific and tangible that you will have learnt while doing your PhD or your other research work. For those who do want to pursue or continue to contribute to academia in some way or pursue a job in academia, I think that the points that were made about publishing from your PhD are good. I have carved my PhD, and this is not my analogy, but it's a good one, like it was a slice of, like a cylinder of salami, and I've sliced those salami slices very thinly. It's still a full slice, but I've maximised the amount of publications I've been able to get out of my PhD. I've pulled book chapters out, popular articles in the conversation, journal papers, and I have the PhD, or the core of the PhD, what's left of it, under contract for a monograph with a publisher. So you can do that, and I encourage you to ask your supervisors for advice if you need it. But if not, just go for it. Pull it out, look at the journal papers that you like, people who write the way you want to write, and emulate that style with your work and start submitting papers and book chapters or whatnot. If you want to go down the book path, you need to think about removing the scaffolding from your PhD. So you don't need, in this next paragraph, I'm going to show you this. You don't need that sort of signalling in a book as you would have in your PhD. So that's you and your skills and what makes you valuable. The next one is about networking. So this is a really tricky one because there's no right or wrong formula. The advice I would give you is to attend everything that you can and talk to as many people as possible. And even if you're attending something like this, which is in a virtual environment and very hard to catch people at coffee afterwards or whatnot, send them an email. Send someone an email and say, I noticed you were on this chat. I saw your name on the chat or on the networking, the virtual call. Can we connect? Can we spend 10 minutes on the phone talking, because I'm really interested in what you do. Flattery, particularly with academics, gets you very far. So if you reach out to any academic and say, I really liked X, Y, Z, could we talk about it maybe over 5 or 10 minutes? And people will usually say yes. Even if they don't, they will remember you. They will remember that you emailed them. And if they're on a panel assessing who should be brought in for interview, they'll remember your name. So always put your best foot forward, and no matter who you're talking with or how you're talking with them, and don't hesitate to reach out to people. For the most part, people are really generous with their time, particularly academics, but even in industry and the private sector, not-for-profit sector as well. If you have decided that your values and skills align with a particular sector and you're looking to network in that group, you can say that. You can message someone and say, I really want to pursue this and I would appreciate your guidance or some advice from you as to who could mentor me or anything like that. Be bold and just ask. The worst they can say is no, and then you're on to the next person. Don't be afraid of social media. You should have a Twitter profile. LinkedIn is really boring, I know, but people look at it. People who make jobs about decisions look at it. So curate your LinkedIn profile carefully. And the final thing, I think, which should apply to everything that you do, is treat others as you wish to be treated. So always be courteous and kind in your communications with people. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And if you realise you can't, let them know as soon as possible. People will appreciate that and remember that just as much as they would your fantastic book chapter or whatever it was that you had committed to and now cannot deliver for whatever reason. And people have long memories. So you might go to a networking event now and in 2028, someone will go, Alexi, I saw you at that thing. Wasn't that great? Or if it was terrible, wasn't it terrible? Usually people say, the food was terrible, but the people were good. And that's important. You know, people will remember you, and importantly, they'll remember how you made them feel. So it's, to me, for my values, it's really important that you always treat people well. And finally, the thing about the future jobs that aren't known. James is 100% right. You should take stock and rest. It's important. Our society doesn't value it enough. It's critical that you take care of yourself in a meaningful way. Do not check email for a week or 2 weeks or longer, however long you need, and replenish yourself. I think people should be encouraged to take risks, particularly you coming to the end of your degree. It's an exciting time. It's scary as hell. You know, there's COVID-19 and, you know, climate change and everything else that's going to kill us all, but we're not dead yet. And there are opportunities, and humans are amazing, creative, articulate and compassionate people at their core. I do believe that. And you have an opportunity to push forward and change things for the better, even if it's just in a really tiny, small way. All those little changes add up to a bigger picture, and that's exciting. The pragmatic person in me would say something like, if you haven't already, you should consider doing things around data and technology and because there'll be lots of jobs there, and healthcare is another one, but you can read all that in the media. I think the opportunities are bigger than that, and I think from my perspective in an NGO, there's immense opportunities for social entrepreneurship. And you can just start that yourself. You can build a community where you live on your street right now and turn that into a business or an initiative. You don't need anyone to give you permission to do it. So go forth and conquer. And I'll stop there.
That is awesome, Tayana. Can I just jump in and ask what did you do when you were just finishing your PhD? How did you and what are you doing now?
Well, I spent a lot of time crying in a heap when I was finishing my PhD, saying things to myself like, why did I do an interdisciplinary PhD, and how ridiculous it was that I thought I was actually going to have any impact, and rah, rah, rah. But in terms of getting a job, I said yes to a lot of opportunities. And that was against the advice of my primary supervisor, who only wanted me to focus on my dissertation. And as a supervisor, that was good advice that you should give to your students. But if I had done that, then I wouldn't be in the position that I am in now. So for me personally, it was the right thing to do. So I took a research assistant job when I had that, and I attended as many things as I could attend, sometimes out of my own pocket. So I would, drive to a conference and just attend for one day when the people who were on plenary or speaking were speaking, so I could meet them. Not everyone can do that. I know that, particularly now, times are different, but I did that. And whenever I was invited to contribute anything written, I would say yes, so long as it aligned with my values and where I saw myself going. So there's no way I could work for BHP. I just couldn't do it. Beggars can't be choosers. We all need to have jobs. And if I was starving on the street, then I probably would work for BHP. But at the moment, and certainly at the end of my PhD, that was not something that was in the equation for me. So I was very much on the path, or I'd hoped to be on the path towards an academic career at the time. So this was 2017, 2018. And then my contract at the university, which would get renewed every 364 days on soft money, grant money. Grant money didn't come in, so my contract was not going to be renewed. So I was starting to think about what I would do. Would I just continue to volunteer my time at the university in the hopes that they might advertise a position? I don't know. And then the job here at Future Earth Australia leading this initiative came up, and I thought I should apply because firstly, if I was a guy, I would apply, even though I didn't match all of the criteria. I thought, well, I should just give it a go anyway. Why not? And also because I thought it was an opportunity to make a real difference and to perhaps step slightly outside of academia. For those who don't know what Future Earth is, it's a global network that links sustainability researchers and innovators together in different ways. So it's very cross-disciplinary and very cross-sectoral. And here in Australia, we work with universities primarily, and also CSIRO and other research institutes to help them do the connecting work. So we do a lot of knowledge brokering and a lot of bridging between different institutions to try and push sustainability initiatives in the national interest and for the national agenda. So I had a lot of those skills from my time at the University of Canberra, where I was leading or supporting a professor in leading a network that was trying to do similar work, but at a subnational scale. So when I wrote my application for this job, I really honed in on those transferable skills. So the fact that I had a PhD was, just a line. And I talked about the project management and things in my PhD and writing for different audiences, which I had done in that process in the context of a selection criteria, which was something like excellent written and verbal communication skills. So that's where I would put those things, and I would talk about my PhD written work there in a way that was connecting with diverse audiences. So it was a little bit bolshy in applying for the job and a little bit really carefully thinking through how to respond to the selection criteria. And I had someone in outside of academia look over my cover letter and CV, which I have no doubt helped, because particularly when you write out of a PhD, you write in a certain way. and you need to be able to write in a different way, depending on where you're applying for your job.
Thank you. I just want to, before going to James, I really want to unpack a little bit about the gender line that you brought up, which is exactly what we see. You know, what you said is absolutely right, but I was just wondering if you can introduce the problem and just unpack it a little bit.
Sure. This is just my perspective for what it's worth, but I think now that I'm in a management role and I've advertised jobs and people apply for them, I can see this from both sides, having done that process, interviewed people and been on panels and also applying for jobs. I think that generally, not specific to any individual, but generally, women underplay their skills. They're very sort of, they justify everything, you know, 3 or 4 times. Whereas for men, generally, again, they'll just go for it. And even if they only have half of the skills for the criteria, they'll just go in anyway and put things in. And then they'll come to an interview full of confidence and be like, yeah, I've never had any experience managing databases at all, ever, but I reckon I can do it. And it's just a different approach. It doesn't work with me, but I think it's good for women in particular, or anyone who's feeling a bit shy. So it may or may not be just a gender thing. I think it might be a different communities and different minorities may also feel the same way, where if perhaps English isn't your first language, or if you've come from a working class family. So for me, like, none of my family got past year 10. My father still doesn't know what a PhD is, or why I left legal practice, to do this PhD, because he just doesn't, it's not his world, you know, he can't understand it. So for anyone coming from those different perspectives, you know, you back yourself 110%, because you will have way more skills, I'm sure, than many people who are applying. So if you read something and it inspires you, and if it aligns to your values and you want to approach your next steps in that way, then I say go for it. And the worst that can happen is they say no, like the networking thing. Big deal. So what? On to the next one.
Absolutely, that's exactly what we see with the SAGE, the gender equity work we do. Is we see some myth that you have to actually fit the essential criteria, all of them, in order to apply. That's not true. You should apply if the job interests you and let the committee decide if you're the right person. It's not the applicant's job to pick the right person. So yeah, encouraging everyone to apply when you find something interesting is really, really important.
I mean, even on that point, Alexi, it's also important to recognize that when you write selection criteria, people write them it's almost impossible for someone to fit perfectly every selection criteria. That person doesn't exist. What you do is, when you write the selection criteria, you know, you write something like, you know, expert knowledge of, you know, I don't know, government discussions. You know, you're not going to sit there and say, oh, yeah, we'd like someone who also has a clue what's going on in the world. You're not going to write that, right? You're going to write in such a way that makes it sound like you have to be an expert, because that's, you know, that's your best pick, your best, you know, the ideal person, and no one's going to fit or tick all those boxes perfectly. And so, yeah, I think you're spot on. You can't, you shouldn't feel that, oh, okay, I don't have that one, or if, you know, and respond accordingly. If you haven't got the skills, and that explain, you know, why you have the transferable skills to take that on, to understand that. So you might not have a certain, you know, knowledge of something, but if you've got the kind of skills that you pick up at a PhD, I bet you can learn to apply it. So yeah, it's a really important point.
So one of the points, Tane, you made was that what are your values and your beliefs, and how that has, you know, guided you in your actions. And so I was thinking, if someone, you know, has just finished his PhD and is just moving out and is desperate for a job, you know, at that particular moment, your brain might be so mushed up that you're not fully considering all your values that you have. So what might be some ways that we always, you know, have them in front of us?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think if your brain's mushed up, you need a rest. That's the first thing I want to say. And you should do that, you know, as best as you can. Go and visit your mum and dad, or a good family friend, or even just your colleagues if you're here from overseas, anyone who can make you some soup and put on a movie for you, or just talk to you about anything not related to your PhD or getting a job. You should do that first and let your brain heal and yourself heal, and you will feel better. I think your value system and the principles that you live your life by are always there, even if your brain is mush. And if you decide that you still want to make decisions before having that rest anyway, or maybe an opportunity has come up and you can't wait and you need to pursue it in that moment, then you will make the decision that's right for you. If you want to be a bit more explicit about that, some people like to do things like, I don't know, they call them vision boards. It may not be for everyone. Some people might find that a bit corny, but it's a way of making a poster or a space in your home that's private to you, and you put on that words that inspire you or can help guide you, or pictures of people, if it's people that you want to remember, or even a roadmap, you know, of where you might see yourself in 5 years or 10 years time and how you might get there. When I took this role, I was asked in the interview how I would transform Future Earth Australia. Before the interview, we had to prepare that, and we had 10 minutes to do this pitch. And I've actually written down here and forgot to mention it. The 3-minute thesis is an excellent way to train yourself to do what James was talking about earlier, which is take a very difficult topic and communicate it to any audience. And you never know when that will happen. You could get in an elevator with someone and you might have to say, an opportunity might arise and you might want to say something useful about yourself, which would lead to an opportunity like a job, or a conference, or anywhere. So it's a good thing to do. Even if you're not doing the 3-minute thesis project, you should practice pitching. If you get interviews, you probably will be asked to do similar things. Pitch your idea. How would you approach this problem? How would you approach working with a difficult team? How would you approach working with a difficult government? So good skill to have. And for this role, I was asked to provide a 10-minute pitch on how I would transform Future Earth Australia. and the strategic plan for FEA wasn't really clear at that time, and so there was very little guidance. But my PhD is in human geography. So as a geographer, I took this spatial map and I did the time and outcomes on the axes. And then I had this sort of sweeping approach, you know, pillars of different things that would achieve certain outcomes and provide some strategic direction to FEA and transform it, in my view, as I was, you know, trying to persuade this panel. And that visual representation can be quite useful. So if you want to think about your values and how your principles will drive your decision making, then you could perhaps do something like that, and it might be good for you. Other people like to do things that are a bit more private and write in journals, and, you know, every night just write down a paragraph of things that you're thinking about and what's next. And that can be good. It gets things out of your head. It helps you develop your writing, and you, as academically trained people, you should keep those skills and keep writing. And you can reflect back on it in a year's time and say, oh, a year ago, I wanted to be a professor by now, let's say, and you might be, you know, heading a government department, implementing some really important policy on health, let's say, and making a difference in the world in that way.
You just ended with making difference in the world, and I was just wondering, you know, picking up trash from the street and putting in the bin, that's making a difference. Changing national government policies on climate change, that's a difference. And after, when you're doing, you know, PhD, or like I'm doing masters, it's hard to see yourself as a change maker, even though you're doing little by little. So how would you, you know, give confidence, so increase your self-esteem that you are changing the world? So how would you how do you personally do it?
These are big questions. I don't know. I don't put up with bullshit. Actually, I probably can't say that, can I? Because we're recorded. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, you can't say it. Actually, you have. Sorry, it's too late now. Just jokes.
I'm sorry.
No.
I think if it's such a personal thing. So what I want to say is, I think if you know what your values are and what you want to achieve, then you just go and do it, and you find a way, you know, and you'll try 50 different ways and they won't work, and you won't get deterred by that. You'll just be like, right, next plan until you find a way through. That's really simplistic, because it's not just about you. It's also about the context, the way you want to change the world, or the topic. There's some really interesting scientific literature around policy windows, levers for change, mechanisms where, you know, government policy, money, public appetite, everything else is sort of all moving, you know, in different ways. And to get through all of that and bring all of those people along, you have to, you know, really think about the time and the scale. So a lot of it is luck, as much as skill. So my answer is not helpful, I don't think. In terms of building your confidence, this is a big one. And when I would teach at Western Sydney University, I had so many profoundly talented students who would really push themselves down or sort of minimize their abilities and who they were as people. And I felt like I spent as much of my time teaching the content as I did encouraging them to step into themselves and to own your space in the world. So I would suggest, in however you can do it, that take up space and that you deserve to take up space. And if someone says no to you, don't take it personally. There's probably lots of reasons why, and you just move on to the next thing and keep taking up space as you do it. I don't know if that's helpful. I hope
that was quite helpful, because it shows your personal insight into it rather than, you know, just a one-word answer. So that's really helpful. One other question I had was that, you know, James specifically mentioned it, I think, is to be flexible. And I was wondering that, how do you develop flexibility? Because human beings naturally tend to be very conservative in their mindset. You know, they just don't want to change until, you know, they're pushed by something external. So
is this directed to me or to James?
Both.
James, did you want to go first? I feel like I've dominated.
No, thanks. You've been fantastic. Thank you so much for your generosity. I just think it's kind of understanding that there's always a long way to get where you want to go. It's not always, A to B is not always a straight line. You know, I've talked about this a lot in previous discussions. And I think part of flexibility is just sort of recognizing that, you know, that decision-making pathways are often ones of compromise. You know, like, you know, I mean, look, I never really wanted to imagine myself as being an administrator at a university. I loved being a researcher more than anything else. It's my favorite thing in the world. But I actually discovered that I'm actually good at building networks for people. That's what I'm really, really good at. Like, building networks is one of my real good skills. And so then I thought, actually, how can I have bigger impact just being a researcher on my own, or being in a position where I can build networks for dozens of researchers to have an impact, right? So it's also recognizing the fact that when you want to have an impact, you know, what's the best pathway for you? And for me, I realized actually creating those networks was just as valuable as any, or was more valuable than any research I would ever do. That's what I kind of decided. I still love my research and I still hope that my research is impactful. But what I really believe in the concept of flexibility is just sort of saying, well, this is an opportunity that arises. How can I take advantage of it? And unless I'm willing to give, you know, to sort of reposition myself, I you know, you're not going to be able to have the impact that you want. I mean, I spoke at a conference, I think it was last week actually, where I talked about you know, even flexibility in the way I present myself, you know. So shortly after this, I've got a very serious meeting and I want to quickly change backgrounds and put on a jacket. And even that's a flexibility that you need to think about, you know. It's just about sort of going, oh, well, you know, this is a really relaxed and fun and, you know, fantastic way to engage with, you know, this session, but their next session requires something different from me. And so just every opportunity, just got to think about, well, what's the best, you know, how can I get the best out of that situation? And sometimes that situation is, you know, academia, for example, at the moment is challenging and difficult because of what's happening with COVID and because of, you know, funding drying up. And so if you still want to be a professor, maybe the best way to be a professor is to get some really great industry experience and build networks and then re-enter academia. That's flexibility, you know. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, James. So what I got from you in essence is flexibility isn't just, you know, you change really big, you do small things at a small time, and over time you build it up like a muscle.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You know, I mean, I used to be very, very focused and one-way minded. You know, I was really in that. And then I got this, you know, going back to a bit of what Tayana said, I used to run a human rights-based organization. And something that I learned was, you know, sometimes when you're working on certain human rights issues, sometimes it's about raising profile so people know what's going on, you know, and changing public opinion. And other times is identifying that one decision maker that can have an impact, that can have a positive impact. And the way you approach those things requires a radically different strategy. So I think every aspect of life is like that, including your career. And so, yeah, that muscle memory is really important in that way, because every opportunity you look at and you think, okay, this is not exactly how I imagined it, or the opportunity that it's not the ideal opportunity, but this is a chance I have. And so how do I take advantage of it, I suppose, is one way to respond. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks, James. Tiana, I think I have one more question for you. So you emphasized that we should be able to clearly express our skills in our CV, right? But so for example, in a PhD, there are a lot of inherent skills in the PhD. You know, no one specifically says, oh, you're doing teamwork or you're organizing. So suppose if I'm writing a CV, how would I bring it all out for me?
The answer is it depends on your audience, which kind of goes to what James was just saying in terms of being flexible. You need to always know who your audience is and adjust accordingly. A sort of rubric, if it's helpful to people, is what's known as the STAR method. So it's, oh God, I can't remember exactly what it stands for. It's something like, I'm going to get this wrong, something like situation, task, approach, and result. So when you're writing your selection criteria, you should frame it. If you Google STAR method, you'll get the proper acronym, but it's something like that. And so you would write, let's say the selection criteria is experience in managing diverse teams and stakeholders. And you would use the STAR method and you would write the situation. So if you've helped with a conference or organising webinars or teaching or anything that's involved organising people, then you would put that in. So you would put your best example where you were really tested and where you really got a good result. So you put your situation in. You know, I was responsible for coordinating 300 students at Western Sydney University across, you know, however many campuses, and achieved, you know, and then you would go through that. I employed these methods to do that. So I led a group of tutors and gave them the tools and information they needed to be able to deliver good teaching for the students. I networked and liaised with, network's the wrong word, liaised with the dean and course coordinator to ensure, you know, that communications were open. You may have helped with the administration of assessment. You may have helped with the administration of organising information through the university. There may be some pastoral care in there for students, for example, and how you dealt with that and cared for them and made sure that policies were adhered to. And so you would put all of that in. And when you're doing it, particularly in academia, where we do so much and we don't realize how much we're doing, you've really got to spell it out like that, you know, and really emphasize how much work you're actually doing. Because when you say to an academic, I'm the head tutor for a subject across 3 campuses of 300 students, they go, oh yeah, that's nice. Where was your last journal paper published, or whatever they say. But out there in the outside world, it's huge. And the amount of coordination and things that you have to manage while doing whatever else it is that you're doing is something that you can sell about yourself.
Yeah, can I just really emphasize that point as well? Because you just can't assume, when you say to someone, oh yeah, I tutor, right? We as academics often just go, oh yeah, okay, whatever, you know, you do that, you know, you sit in a room with a bunch of people and you share knowledge, right? But if you unpack that from a skills perspective, right, it's about overseeing a complex, especially Western Sydney, cross-cultural environment, making sure that, you know, like you said, pastoral care, making sure no one's left behind, that you're coordinating things like assessments, you're meeting really strict deadlines on when you complete your marking. So, you know, if you begin to unpack the skills associated with even tutoring one class in one subject, right, you will probably list half a dozen skills. If you throw in 3 classes and you throw in then coordinating a subject, and then you throw in project management for around, you know, being even a research assistant, and then you throw in leading your own research project, you've got 2 pages worth of skills, right? But what we tend to say is we turn around and say, I'm doing my PhD, I've done a PhD, and just assume that the rest will be shared by magic, right? Now, you could say that to me because I've done a PhD, you could share it with Alexi and Diana and others, but for someone who hasn't got a PhD and is not interested in a PhD, right, you have to unpack the skills in a different way. And I think that's a really important way to frame what you're thinking, or how to apply for that.
Wonderful. That's great. So thank you, James and Tanaya, especially for joining us and having a wonderful discussion. Lastly, before we end this webinar, there's a poll which we had to ask for future webinars. If everyone could quickly do that, that would be great. And
so, Afi, would you like to just introduce your group, the Research Continuity Council, as people are voting?
yeah, sure. So Research Continuity Student Council was originally set up when the COVID pandemic started and the university essentially closed the gates. And our first objective was to make sure that there is still a sense of community present, and that people can, PhD students in specific, can talk with each other and, you know, complain about their problems and feel safe about doing that. And that's why we created a Slack channel to let them, you know, steam it out without any supervisor watching them over. And so then we really moved on from there. So now we're working on creating and helping PhD students by showing them pathways they can take from within the uni and outside the uni. And that's our goal.
I'm just going to put the URL for the Slack channel if anyone wants it. So V, I think you've done amazingly well. Well done on sharing this session.
Thanks.
And I see that you're getting your answers about preferred time. It seems the consensus is to keep this time.
Yeah.
Perhaps reach out to everyone, because obviously you've selected for people that can make this time to begin with.
Yeah.
And if you guys have any new topics you'd like to put, maybe V, you can put the RCSE email address on the chat.
Yes, I will. Just give me a sec.
While that's happening, I'll just quickly mention that Western Sydney University are members of Future Earth Australia, and we have a really strong early career researcher and practitioner capacity building program. What we're trying to do there is connect academics with people who are doing work, early careers in private practice and government and others. We've moved all that online, so that's still occurring. And we also have a dedicated early career researcher newsletter and a dedicated ECRP, I can't forget our practitioners, LinkedIn group as well. So if anyone's interested in that, you can reach out to us at futureearth.org.au. Thank you. And we can connect you in with that community.
Yeah, and I should say that's how I met Diana. So I'm in the EMCR forum of the Academy of Sciences, where Diana is also based. So it's just this networking that we do as volunteers that ends up creating those professional relationships, and it really helps build up your CVs. And as Diana said, the LinkedIn is important, even if it's a bit of a bore. But make sure you populate it with projects you've done. And don't be afraid to step up and volunteer for some roles. So the RCSC is a 6-month position, so just 1 semester. If you're interested, just send us an email and reach out. So I want to thank everyone and looking forward to seeing you next time.
Yes.